All right, guys. So today we're just going over a few quick things, special effects, lighting, or uh, lighting for visual effects for later. So your lighting to make it look like the visual effect, to give it some motivation, and to give the visual effect artist to somewhere to kind of attach where their lights are going to be and how they're going to look, so that it looks more realistic and the lights bouncing around the room and bouncing off the subject, so that it's not just all created visually. In After Effects. I'm sorry, post production, visual effects, um, because that is a lot harder to do and make it look realistic. Because there's a lot of little subtle things that we don't really notice as much when we're doing anything in real life, when we're doing it practically. So doing everything as much as we can practically will save a lot of time and make it look a lot more realistic in your final shots. If you're doing any kind of visual effects shots and you want to have there's some certain lighting element that needs to happen. And then the last thing we're going to learn is just going over the lighting a moving subject or moving a light within a scene. So today's stuff should be really quick, and yeah, we should be done like fairly soon. So I'm just gonna share my screen, and if you guys have any questions or comments throughout, just pause and say, hey, what about this, or anything like that. So first thing we're talking about is like you can create a kind of a fire effect, and different people do this in different ways.
A lot of people got it very wrong, I will say, like video tutorials.
Yeah, some of the fire effects, like depending on what you have, the more lights you use, the better, because you just have more variety and more control. There's LED lights now that you can control and change the color temperatures of, and change how bright or how dark it is. And you can even set it, certain lights, you can set them to different timers and different things so that they go off or they flicker, or some even have preset fire settings that make it look a little bit more like fire. Like one of the videos showed, it was like a LED tube light that flickered around every so often in orange and yellows and reds, so that it looked like fire was bouncing off of something. And that way the visual effects artist went in later, they saw the light, and they decided where to put their fire.
The video I sent in the group was, out of all of the tutorials on how to do the things, that one was one of the best ones, and I sent it in the WhatsApp group.
Yeah, so that should be there for anyone who wants to like look at it more. But some people do it differently. Like if you don't have a bunch of different lights, this guy right here, he's just using a bunch of different light bulbs, and he's setting them to different temperatures. And so that could work. You can also use gels.
Someone used like different colored gels and cut them into pieces as well, and put them in the lights and stuff like that. Blended them together.
I think it's called like cuculoris or something. You can cut different shapes into a thing like that, and then you just wave the light within the thing. I think I can actually look that up. Yeah, so that's what that is. It's kind of like you can shape the light however you want. If you make shapes like that, you're shining a yellow or an orange light through it, and you're waving that thing. You're grabbing it and bending it around. It can look like there's fire or there's something going through, like making a shape for the light instead of it just being a flat, straight image. Because when you're using fire, the fire's dancing around. The light's never going to be static and staying the same brightness in one area. It's dancing around. The fire goes towards the left, and it goes towards the right. Then it just does a big fume up in the air. So it gives off different color temperatures, and it also gives off different amounts of light in different areas of the scene.
Hues,
so never be like a what?
Different hues, yeah.
Yeah, so using something like this, you can shine it through, and then you can bend it around and shape it and make it look like it's dancing like a fire. So it'll look a little more realistic.
Because one of the things that he touched on a lot is that fire is not like one single color or one single brightness. It has a lot of movement. And remembering that will really help when making it as realistic as possible, is keeping that uneven movement and that uneven color, mixing colors together.
And that's
stuff
usually
like
why you want multiple lights as well, so that you can, like in this image right here, they're using 3 different lights, and they have ones that are a little more white for that, like the middle of the fire, and the other ones it's a little darker orange for the outside of the fire, the little flames that pop up at the end. And that way they're mixing all those colors together to make it look more like fire. Because when you just have one light, it can work, but it doesn't work as well, because fire is never one color. It is multiple
That
colors
makes
of one. What was that?
That makes sense.
Yeah,
Fire
because
isn't
it can be
one
like
color,
blue,
black
it can be
cloud.
green, it can be orange, it can be really dark orange, sort of getting towards the reds, or it can be pretty white, yellow, and all sorts of stuff in between, depending on what is burning, how big the fire is, and things like that. So some of the things they do is like they just, like this would be they're planning to put the fire in post-production with a visual effect, but they still want to give that light off to make it look like it's dancing around that chimney, hitting onto the subject, looking like firelight. And then they just add the fire later so that it all kind of blends together, and it's a lot easier than just trying to mimic everything from scratch in post-production. Let me see. Using effects like fire and other post-production elements. I said that one. Okay. Yep. Just Aperture, like they're one of the ones that on YouTube, they're one of the best at explaining lighting, because they actually make their own lights and stuff like that. They were saying the multiple lights is just the best, because especially if you just have one person doing it, they can hold 2 LEDs or something like that. You can put some gels over them, and then you can have them just kind of wave those back and forth on the subject, and it'll look like fire dancing off of your subject's face, or whatever the subject is. So if you have it available, multiple lights is going to be better for this kind of effect. Or using like something like this, if you just have one light, at least putting something like this in front of it to shape it so that it's not just constant from one direction. It'll really help sell that effect for you. I couldn't find a picture for this, but police sirens is another one that you can do with multiple lights, RGB lights especially. And again, you want multiple lights, and the way that you want it to happen, you see a lot of people, even some of the videos in the syllabus had this, where the light was just going from blue to red to blue to red. And while that's okay, it's not exactly the same as what you would actually see on a
and
police
it's
car.
not accurate. Yeah.
On a police car, right? On a police car, they actually have like the lights. They spin
have it
around.
Ways. They say that it can vary from state and can vary from country, but more on average, they have it in those 2 different ways.
Averagely, they either switch back and forth between the blue and the red, or if they're all blue, it's depending on where they're at. So you have to look up kind of where your story takes place and what kind of lights the police use around there if you're really trying to stick to the continuity of the script. But if you're just using like the red and blue, they either like switch between the red and blue constantly, so where it's kind of blends together into purples, reds, and blues, or they're going to have those spinning lights on the inside, which spin around and shine towards one way and then to the other way. And because of that,
so what they'll do is have like one red and one light next to each other. So one will blink, then the other will blink next to it. One will blink, then the other will blink next to it. And it'll like blend a little together when you see it, instead of having like one light flash red and then flash blue.
Well, it's a pattern, and then there's strobe lights technically, but they're colored strobed. Red and blue is the most common you'll see, but some counties have like blue and white. Green, I've seen green and white. And then of course there's the fire department, which uses like a combination of like everything. But it's just, for me, it's just more simpler just to go ahead and buy some cop lights as opposed
they
to
said
but
that
that's another option as well. Or you could buy, something like this, something that's going to
they're
kind of
not expensive. I think there's a couple different companies. You can go to the one I know of is Galls, GALLS. and they sell a whole bunch of police equipment, uniforms, belts, and then a whole bunch of stuff to rig your car up to make it look like a cop car. And this is like legit law enforcement equipment. It's not like stuff from movies or anything like that. But you could just buy them. I have like so many of them rigged up, and like it just irks me because like I'll go on set and I'll see a cinematographer try to replicate a police car, and I'm like, man, why didn't you just tell me? Like I really hate showing up to set trying to do something that I have equipment to do.
Mm-hmm.
But seeing as I'm always the sound guy, it's like they never really correlate. I'm never really included in the meetings, which is something I guess I'm gonna bring up. Maybe you should include the sound guys to your meeting too as well, because it's
Oh,
just
he did.
it's
Yeah,
frustrating.
he was in yesterday.
Yeah, because like I'll show up to set and I'm like, yo, I have like a whole bunch of stuff because I do more than just sound and stuff, So it's like I have like prop guns, whole bunch of props that we could have used for set. And the biggest one for me is like the cop light. Is like, dude, why don't you guys like tell me? Like I have everything that I could rig that up to make it look legit. But yeah, it's just for me, it's just so much easier just to get a light bar and just put it in the dash of a car, and just you can get you a let's see, cops usually use American cars, so it either be a Chevy, you can pull that off, some kind of Chevy SUV, or like if you're trying to get the undercover cop car look. But if you want like authenticity and you happen to have a car that kind of has that build, you might be able to pull it off. But I also know, like, if you want it, you could also talk to your local police department to see about renting out a cop. They're pretty, a lot of times they're willing to put themselves in your film
Yeah, cool.
at an expense. So like they'll do, because you know how they do moonlighting and stuff like that. So they'll just say, well, we can send you an off-duty cop, and you can pay him however much and however whatever he feels is comfortable. But it's just a negotiating factor right there.
Yeah, so you could definitely do that. If you don't have the money for that, then something like this would work for you. And also, I saw somebody that was using, if you don't have like the real lights or you can't get them for some whatever reason, somebody was using they were in a county that had the red and blue, so they were using a red on one side and a blue on one side. They put it to I think it was a light stand, and they put like they kind of made like a contraption that had the blue on one side, the red on the other, and then they were able to spin it around, and they just spinned it around at whatever speed they wanted to make it look like the rotating lights of the cop, which sold the effect. So
Yeah, you don't
there's
see
multiple
that
ways to do
anymore.
it. What was that?
I said you don't see that style anymore, but that's kind of like if you were going back into 1992 and you wanted to make it look like they have one of the lights they put on their hood, like you could go that route. But I just want to say before one last thing about these lights. Like I said before, they are considered strobe lights. So you have to consider when you're using these, like the frame rate is gonna be, because it's a strobe, so it's gonna
Oh
look
yeah.
weird on camera sometimes. So you may have to do a lot of adjusting, or if you're cool with it, like like I just normally I've seen TV shows where it's like they'll let the strobe do its thing and not really try to worry about what it's gonna look like, as far as the that effect that it gives. But that's one thing to consider is too, that it is a strobe and it is gonna have some kind of effect determining what kind of frame rate you're using.
And so it could be like blinking on your camera if you're showing it.
Yeah, it could look like weird on your camera.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So that's that. That's something else that you can do with lighting. You can mimic something like that. Again, I don't have a picture of this, but lightning is easy enough to do. You just get like a light, you put it outside of a window or above the character and you just flash that light on and off. You can have, different, some of them, again, they can be pre-programmed to have like, they can flash on and off a few times and then they can flicker here and there. So it looks like it's a big lightning bolt. And then there's like a small one over from a greater distance. And it goes like from very dim to very bright. If you don't have something like that, the next best thing would just be getting somebody to turn off and on a light and just doing it however they kind of like, however you feel would work best. But lightning is very sporadic and it doesn't follow a rhythm at all. So whatever they're doing should be able to pass for a lightning effect as long as they are like, flickering it on and off a little bit and not leaving it on for too long, since lightning doesn't stay for very long. You can also use lights for cars, which I actually didn't have a picture of. Again, let me see. Yeah, nope. Well, the effect is really just like having somebody have a light over a car and you just have them walk backward or move their hand backward with the light so that it looks like they are passing street lamps. If you're not actually driving anywhere and you just want it to look like the car's moving and you're using like a projector or using something behind them or just using a green screen and you're going to fill it in later, whatever you're using behind them to make it look like the car's moving. Doing the lighting effects is very important to make it look like there's brake lights, that there's street lights, and that there's headlamps coming from the opposite direction of traffic. And so using different lights to do this is a really good effect to pull it off. You just put the light on and you just have somebody move it around, going from the front to the back for a street light. A red light flashing in front of the car could look like brake lights, and a light that goes from dim to bright and then goes back to being really dim, that can look like a car passing by from the opposite direction of traffic. Again, this is easily done with like some of those LED lights that can be controlled and can be pre-programmed, but it can also be done with lights that are more manual. You just have to kind of figure out how you're going to get the effect. Some people were using Duvetine and they were like opening up the Duvetine, or it might have been Duvetine or another thing, but they were having a light, they had it shine towards the car and then they closed the Duvetine to make it look like it was passing. And then they kind of opened it real quick so that the light would go from dim to bright. And so certain things you can do to make it look passable for that kind of scene as well. One of the videos actually showed for special effects lighting in general was using lights as reference points for visual effects for the actors and extras can be very beneficial because it gives them something to look at, something to react to, and something for them, for the light to play off of whatever the character is supposed to be. Excuse me. 2016 Ghostbusters actually used an LED light attached to a drone. Whatever you think of the movie, it doesn't matter. I think it's not good. But,
No, I
but
know.
that effect.
Just joking.
What?
Just joking.
It was an LED light attached to a drone, and they had it as a reference point for the crowd of actors, as well as to give off the green glow for the final visual effect of the dragon. Let me see if I can find that. Man, I can't find any of this.
Right? Sorry, guys. Normally we have all this like prepared for the Reddit and everything, but pre-production week has been driving us pretty crazy.
Yeah. Well, anyway, it was on stage. It kind of looked like, it looked like this. So it was like a ghostly dragon or whatever. I've never seen the movie, but I'm assuming it looks like this, and it had a green glow. So what they did is they put an LED light, they attached to a drone, they had it start from the stage and just kind of float up. So it looked like a, they had the light glowing green or giving off a green hue so that it looked like it could be that dragon for the audience, the actors, the extras, and so that the visual effects artist knew where this thing was and the light was already playing off of everybody. If you look down in the crowd, the faces, you can see the light, the green light is glowing, especially around that middle center. That's where the drone is. It's shining that green light down. And that's why the rest of them are having just a little bit of fall off spill of that green hue, but the ones in the middle are having that very bright green. And so the visual effects artist can maybe enhance that later, but they didn't really have to do too much with the lighting effects to make it look more realistic. That was already there on set. Another thing we saw was when in, let me see, Dr. Manhattan. Okay, so in Watchmen, Dr. Manhattan, the guy who played him, he was wearing this suit the whole time. And the suit was just a suit that had a bunch of LEDs that had blue, the blue hue shining off so that it reflected off of the actors and co-stars and all that, so that, and the scene itself, so that whenever he's walking through and, you know, he's giving off that blue hue in the movie, it's really just LEDs and they're putting the visual effect over him and matching it. And those little squares on his body are used for the camera to track it, to know where he is in that space for the visual effects to have an easier time matching it to him, so that they can overlay the visual effect of Dr. Manhattan over the actor and the suit itself. But that's just something they did practically so that the light actually plays off of the scene and it already is in the scene. It doesn't need to be added later. You got all that blue hue shining off of the co-stars right here. You got it shining off the background. Anything that's reflective that you wouldn't really notice in post-production if you're in a hurry and you're trying to get these shots done. That's something you might miss. You might not put as much reflection off of something like a picture or a mirror. But if you have something practical on set, it really gives off the effect for you. And then you just have to work on the main visual effect because the rest is already pretty much taken care of. So anything you can do practically on set basically is what they were saying this whole week, is anything practical on set is going to make it so much easier to make it seem realistic and give the others a feeling of what it will be like. You know, I'm assuming the Manhattan costume was a little harder to work with for his co-stars because you had to treat him like a serious thing, and he's wearing the suit that looks like he's from Tron Legacy or something. But for the other effects, like for the crowd to see where the dragon is, everyone's looking at the same spot. It was really a really good practical effect to use a drone so that they can all be looking at the same area. Otherwise, you might have some actors, some of the extras, because it's such a large crowd, looking in a different direction, and then it wouldn't sell the effect as much, especially because they'd stick out and not everyone's looking at the same area because no one knows where this thing really is. But if you have something on set that you're going to overlay with the actual visual effect, it gives the actors and the extras and everybody on set a better visual representation of what's going on in the scene for that final product. Not only that, but it also very much helps the visual effects artist later to have a reference point for where they're going to put the visual effect, how bright they're going to make certain parts. They might make, parts of his body a little more blue in different areas. He gets more intense. When he gets angry, he glows more, things like that. So on set, they were just upping the LED brightness and then they were lowering it. And that way the visual effects artist knew how bright or dark to make the Dr. Manhattan visual effect. Another thing is Star Wars Force Awakens. They used glowing LED lightsabers when they used to use, I think it was just like regular sticks in the old movies. It was not sticks, but it was like fencing swords, sort of, but it was made to not hurt anybody. So it was like some plastic fencing swords kind of, and that's what they used in the originals, I believe. And now they use LED glowing sticks so that they can have a visual reference point so that the light is already shining off of everybody. Let me see. kind of see like right here. So the light's already shining off of both of them. Wherever that light goes, that's where they're going to have it in the final scene. It plays better for the whole look and the feel and the realism of the shots, because that's really where the light went. So when you add it in post-production, it doesn't change too much, and it doesn't make you wonder why there's red shining off of that part of his body. It doesn't feel unnatural. Another thing for special effects lighting is TV, making it seem like a TV is shining on somebody's face. Again, you want to use multiple lights if you can, and you want them to kind of be set to different colors, and you just kind of switch between one and the other, because TV is constantly changing. The images are changing, the scene is changing. So it shouldn't stay one kind of light temperature. It shouldn't say one kind of color temperature. It should kind of change between multiple ones, multiple colors, because TV is constantly changing. Whatever you're watching, it could be a sci-fi movie, and that would be, you know, a lot more colorful than something that's just like a romance movie. So it also depends on what you have in your script, if you have what the movie is, or if you don't, you just kind of pay attention to what the character would seem like they might want to watch at that point, and then try to match the lighting to that. But it shouldn't be one light that stays the same the whole way through, because TV is constantly changing as well. So it's dancing around kind of like fire. So it shouldn't have just one light shining the same brightness the whole time. It should be
Another thing that they
going in and
mentioned,
out.
size of the light as well. It shouldn't be like you have to. They actually said before you shoot it, think about what kind of TV you want them to be looking at. If it's an older TV like 1960s or 70s, if it's going to be smaller, if it's a widescreen, because that can also, you know, influence like how much lighting you're going to put. Otherwise, it's just not going to look very realistic either. If you want like a tiny TV and then you have this huge lighting all around them.
Right. So they were saying, like, if you're doing a TV, just kind of be aware of what kind of TV. If you're never going to even show the TV, you don't really have one, you just want to make it look like they're watching TV. Just kind of figure out what kind of TV they might have, what era you are setting this in, and you know, how bright that TV would be. Just like look up reference points and stuff like that. Like she said, if it's a big 65-inch screen TV, plasma or something, it's going to give off
As
a lot more
well as,
brightness.
yeah, I was going to say, if it's like a super huge TV, you also have to think about the space that you have, because if it bleeds too much, then it might not look as much as, you know, TV light or something like that. Depending on the other sources of light you have, it might not be as obvious that it's a TV light, or it might not look as good. I don't know how to explain it, but I think you know what I mean.
I think so.
Yeah, for example, like there was one video we were watching where there was like a light in the back that shouldn't have been there because there were no practicals, and it just looked like there was, and it was kind of overshadowing the TV light, and so you could like barely see the TV light, and so it was hard to like notice that was the light coming from the TV.
I think I
You know what I mean?
I think I understand what you mean. Yeah. So
No,
you
no.
want to, like, if you're using a TV light, what you're saying, like, you want it to be, like isolated, like you can see the light. Is that what you mean, honey?
I don't think you remember the video I'm talking about, because otherwise you would know what I'm talking about. We were watching the video.
You don't
and
want it to spill off into the background too much, because TVs aren't
Yeah.
that bright. Is that what you mean?
Yes, that too. Yes, that too. And also, like, if you're going to shoot a scene where the person is watching TV, try to make it look like the light is supposed to be them watching TV, and not have like a million other lights around being distracting, if that's the mood you're going for.
Okay. I think I get what you're saying. So, like, it depends on what the scene is. If they're watching it at night, if they're watching it in the dark.
Yeah, that's what I
whatever
mean.
they're
Like,
doing.
if that's what you're going for, just keep that in mind. Because that was the scene that we saw while we were watching the video. I remember you even commented, like, why is it so bright back there? And we could barely notice that light was coming from the TV, because there was like some other lighting, and for the scene that they wanted, for the scenario that they were talking about, it didn't look as good, and it, wasn't as convincing.
Oh yeah, because the TV will shine light a little bit, but like if the further you get from a TV, the less light it's going to be shining on anybody. So I think the scene you're talking about, we watched, they were watching TV, and behind them was like a hallway leading to a door for the front door, and the front door was very bright, and it's because they were using the light for their, acting as if it were the TV, but they had it so bright for the subject to be lit that it was casting a lot of spill off onto the background and making it look like it was super bright in the background, even though they wanted it to look like nighttime, like in this photo right here.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah. So yeah, you also want to pay attention to that. You want to be able to block the light from spilling too much. It depends on how close the background is, of course, but generally speaking, the further you get from that TV, you shouldn't have too much spill coming from it if it's the only light source in your scene. So just pay attention to that when you're doing these things. Another thing about special effects lighting, this is more of just like getting those light beams in your shot. It's called volumetric lighting. It's not so much special effects, but it's just more of like, if you want to see the beams of light themselves, you don't want to have to add them in post. You actually want them practically on set. You have to get something in the air that will capture that light and cast that beam. A lot of people use fog or haze machines to get a little bit of haze, a little bit of that kind of like this look into it, so that all that light spills everywhere. It makes it a little bit softer, and it has those beams really shine through. If you have a harder light source, those beams really shine, especially if it's like a LCloud light spotlights. They shine through, and they leave a huge kind of like a sunlight beam, something kind of like this. And you'll see it all the way from beginning to end. If you don't have something in the air like that, you'll usually just see the light from where it's coming from and where it's ending. But if you have a lot of like either fog or haze, or you can use something like dirt, smoke, dry ice, anything that's going to hang in the air and catch that light as you push through it, it'll leave these kind of light beams in the air for you in your shot. A lot of people use these, use that type of stuff to get a little bit more of a dimension in their lighting. And it just depends on what kind of shot you're going for, what kind of feel you want. But it can add another element as well. Dust can also be picked up if you're just going for that. Like, I don't know if you have dust, but like if you ever see outside of a window and you're like, it's daytime and you're not having any lights on and it's just lights pouring in through the window, you can see all the dust floating through the air. So it's kind of like that. You just see everything depending on what kind of element you put into the air for that light to go through.
Those machines, the haze machine, there's haze and there's fog. I think there's two different, there's subtle differences in between the two, but I know I use a lot of haze. They can set off smoke detectors. So keep that in mind if you use it. Make sure you cut off all the smoke detectors. And then those machines are pretty affordable. I have a couple myself, but they're like really, really cheap and small. So it's like they run out of juice a lot, and then they leak a lot too. So, but they're pretty affordable.
Yeah, and that's why we're gonna touch on the fact that like another tip that we saw, it can really help with certain aspects of lighting from what we've seen, depending on what you're going for. But guys, unless it's like to your style and it fits your narrative, I mean, it can be pros and cons, and like Brian is saying, it does have a lot of negatives. So you don't always have to use the haze. Just saying, because for some reason, some people think that it's not an indie film unless there's haze or there's fog, and sometimes it drives me a little nuts.
Well, the haze, it depends on how you use it. The haze is usually like the icing on the cake. Like if you have it, go for it. But
depends on the movie. I feel like, but that's just I just like it a little crisper, I guess. Like everything's so subjective when it comes to these things.
Could we go into the differences? Just
Yeah,
Haze.
like haze is more like it's kind of hard. It's like a vape, and then there's fog, which is more kind of like moist, and the light kind of bounces off of it differently.
The haze
So
is a little more subtle,
Is
right?
the fog
Like,
a little thicker?
the fog is a little bit thicker, and then they use fog usually on outdoors because it lasts longer.
Hmm.
Because like haze, like just if you're going outside, it the second you spray it, it's gonna like burst out and the wind is just gonna. But fog, on the other hand, is thicker, so it kind of lasts a lot longer. So we did a feature, and that's like these were theater people, so they had like the big machines, and they had like 4 or 5 of them, and they were just setting them off like all at the same time. And but we were shooting outside, so like it stayed, like it would stay there. We had a window. It was like it would last, or the fog. We had a window. It would last for like a good 5-10 minutes between takes, and then we would have to refog everything up again. But haze is more like it's more dry, so it's better for indoors. And then you can buy haze in a can as well. You can buy it. They come in cans, and you can just, like, if you don't have the machine, or you feel like you can't afford it, or if you just want to experiment, you can buy haze in a can. But I think they're like $20 a can though. But yeah, fog is thicker and it's more ideal for outside stuff.
That's cool.
Okay,
I was
cool.
wondering if are they both like water based or just the
I'm
fog?
not necessarily. I know fog is water based. I'm not necessarily sure about the haze, but they both come with some kind of liquid that is used to
Yeah.
set it off.
Okay.
So Brian, in your experience, would you say this image looks more like haze and this one looks more like fog, just from the way it looks?
Yeah, I would say that.
Okay, so it does it like Priscilla was saying and Brian was saying, like the haze is a little less noticeable, I would say. Like the fog is a lot thicker. You can kind of see it in the air, and the haze is a little more not as noticeable. It's a little more
Yeah.
I like the
mixing in with the
haze.
scene.
Fog, fog is more noticeable, and then it moves around a lot more as well. So like if you're trying to, like, if all you're doing is trying to expose the light rays and just have them, I would definitely go for the haze over the fog, because
Mhm.
sometimes fog can get really, I mean, if you've ever driven on a road on a foggy night, like you know what that looks like. So it could get that bad.
Okay, yeah, or you can't like
yeah,
see what's
I don't
going
know.
on.
From what we've
Yeah.
seen, it's just like my thought would be, like, for lighting purposes, yeah, I think haze can be very useful. I just have, like, become a little bit of a pet peeve, the fact that everyone thinks that they need the fog and they need the haze, and sometimes, depending on what you're going for, it might not be necessary. So it's just like that was something that was a little frustrating, because I was like, why does everyone use the freaking fog and the haze? Like, that's not always necessary, and sometimes it makes the video look crappier, because sometimes your camera's not the best and it looks like blurry or something. And it was just starting to annoy. But I was like, no, it's a style choice. It's like an independent thing, and it depends on what you want. But because it was overused, I was like, is this an indie thing? Is this like a thing that I didn't know about? So yeah, it was fun. It was funny.
Okay, yeah. So that's volumetric lighting, which is when you have something in the air like that. It could be fog or haze. That's the most often used. But if you don't have access to that, you're outside. You could use dirt. Throw that up in the air. You'll see that in some like
Yeah, one of the
you'll see that in
videos
like
was
some car scenes, like when they're driving off or they're coming in, and you'll see the headlights shining through the night or something like that. They might use like dirt and just throw it up at right before they take that shot.
didn't they use
Smoke as
a
well. You could use smoke from natural
didn't they
sources,
use
or
like
I'm sure there's like a smoke machine as well.
didn't they use like shaved ice for one of them, and it was like
Dry
and they put
ice.
dry
Yeah,
ice,
if you
sorry.
put dry ice in the
Dry ice.
water, it stays to the floor more for dry ice. That's what they said. They said it's colder, so it's gonna stay on the ground a lot more. But you can like what they did is they put it to the door and they just had it kind of leaking out underneath the door so that it seemed kind of creepy. There was some kind of supernatural thing going on in the room. When they opened the door, there's a little bit of that dry ice spill coming off into the person's feet and just covering it. So they do all act very differently from each other. So it depends on what you want to go for. But I didn't know the thing about the haze and the fog. That's good to know.
I mean, I know there was some difference, but yeah, it is
I
a
knew there
lot.
probably would be. I just didn't know what it was. So I'm glad to like.
I mean,
kinda
I
know
knew
a
I
bit
had
better.
an idea. I feel like I had an idea because I was like, well, obviously fog is going to be thicker, fog is going to be grayer. But yeah, it is good to have like someone who's used both to explain a little better.
Yep, and then smoke is like very thick, so it won't have as much light coming through it. But you can use something like a smoke machine to have some kind of effect like that as well. It'll be a little more dangerous because smoke can like cause people to cough and get in their lungs and be hard to breathe. So be cautious whenever you're using something like that. But those are just some things you can do to get that volumetric lighting, to give that third, well, not third, but give another element, another dimension, another bit of depth to the image. All right, now we're moving on to lighting a moving subject or moving lights within a scene. You can use something like a light meter. You always want to use something like a light meter if you're doing blocking and you're trying to get the light to be either equal or you want it to be dropped off at certain points. Using a light meter is usually the easiest way to do that. So you can just see how much light is spilling into this side of the room, how much light is spilling into that side of the room, wherever your actor, after you've blocked them and you know where they're going to be in the scene, you can see how bright or how dark you want to make things. And if you want to evenly light it, then the light meter is the best way to do that. So you can light it up until you figure out the even lighting that you need. Let me see. Yeah, that way you can put lights in certain areas of the scene that you want to brighten up. You can take light away from certain parts that you want darker. It just helps you kind of know what's happening in the room without having to try to pay attention to every single detail, because a lot of those things can be missed, especially if you're on certain camera settings and you know that you're not going to see as much or you're going to see more than the camera's going to see. You want to use the light meter to really know the science behind it so you can kind of work around all those obstacles in one go. But if you don't have one, then just try to use your best judgment. Soft light is going to light a scene a lot more and distribute light more evenly across the shot than hard light will. So if you're just trying to evenly light it, using soft light is going to be your best bet. If you're trying to evenly light it with hard light, it's going to be a little bit harder because there's going to be shadows coming from different directions depending on where your lights are coming from. So it'll take a bit more work to figure out how to get your lights just right. But if you're okay with them walking into darkness and then walking into light and walking into darkness like they might in a regular space, and you don't need them lit the entire time, using hard light is fine, because then they can be in harsh hard light, walking into the shadow, and then going back into harsh hard light again. Someone said you also want to introduce lighting flaws, adding some like shadows and stuff to make it less artificial and less of a set look. Adding just a little bit of shadow by a plant or something wherever your light is coming from. If you add those lighting flaws that happen naturally, it'll make it look a little bit more realistic and won't make it look like a sitcom, unless that's kind of what you're going for. If you want it to look like that, you don't really worry about how realistic it looks. You're just trying to light it to get the scene lit evenly and everybody to be in even lighting, flat lighting. There's a thing called Hollywooding a light, or Hollywood a light. That's when somebody's holding a light, like in this picture. They're walking in sequence with the subject, and they're just keeping in rhythm with them so that they stay lit the entire time. They can be to the side of the camera like this, or if the character is walking straight towards the camera and the camera's dollying backwards, the person with the light will be behind that camera person, holding the light above their head. That way they're making sure they're out of shot, but they're also sticking to the movement of the camera and the person so that the lighting stays the same throughout the shot. It's easiest done with battery powered lights, but it can also be done if you have like really long extension cords. It looks like in this, it's plugged in. It takes a bit more work, and a bit more safety issues, because if they have a cable they have to watch out for, especially depending on where the camera is going. If they're going backwards, they're going to need to make sure they're picking up the cable as they go, or have somebody doing that so that it doesn't end up behind the subject and in camera. But if it's to the side like this, it's a bit easier. But it still is a issue if it's a really long cable and it adds a bit of a tripping hazard. So it's usually easily done. If you're doing it on a budget, especially, it's easily done with a battery powered light. And that way they can just attach it to that pole and then just hold it up and walk in sequence with the actor. And they don't have to worry about any cables or anything like that getting in their way. It can be used for scenes like somebody walking down a dark alley at night. Sometimes when you don't have the area is too big and you don't have the light to make it work, or it's too wide of a shot, or it's revealing too much of the scene to where you can't put a light in certain areas and you want them to have a long take walking through or running through a certain area. This is one of the best ways to do it. Have somebody holding that light and just following in sequence with them. You just need to know your blocking so that you know where your actor is going to be in the scene. And that's for everything. That's for setting up the lights before, in the scene when you're not following them. That's for knowing where they're going to go when you are following them. Either way, you always want to know your blocking beforehand, so you know where the actor is going to be in the scene, so you're not wasting time setting up lights just to figure out, oh, the actor doesn't even go over there. Never mind. That's going to be way too much of a waste of time. So blocking is always good. You always need to know your blocking before you start setting up lights, like for the subject. Excuse me. So Hollywooding a light is kind of like a sound person with a boom pole with the mic, but they're just booming a light instead. You can think of it like that. The sound person stays somewhere around that same area, behind the camera or beside the camera or something like that. And they try to be out of frame, and they're following along with the actor. So once you have all those people doing the same thing, if the camera's moving while the actor's moving, while the light person is moving, while the sound person is moving, that's a lot of people. And then you probably need to have another person to kind of watch out for everyone and guide them so they're not tripping over each other or tripping over other things behind them that they're not noticing, because they have to pay attention to the scene. So it does take more crew to be able to pull something like this off, but it is possible, and a lot of movies do it, indie and a higher budget. But it does also require space, because there's a lot of people moving in sequence, so they're going to have to be standing near each other without getting in the way. The sound person can't get their boom pole in the way of that light, or it's going to cast that shadow. The light person has to be walking in sequence, otherwise they're going to bump into the camera person, or they're going to get the light too close or too far from their subject, and then the light's going to change in a way they don't want. Camera person needs to make sure they're not bumping into the people in the back, otherwise they're going to bump the camera and make it look weird. So there's a lot of things going in sequence in these kinds of things. Sometimes they'll have the light on a dolly as well. It's kind of like the same concept, except for that the light is also on a dolly, and so it's a person doing a dolly instead of a person walking with it. But it's the same concept. You're just keeping in sequence with the actor as they're moving. Alternatively to this, you can have somebody kind of like this, standing off to the side somewhere of the camera. And let's say these actors were going to get up and they're going to walk to the corner of the room, or I know, off screen towards us, towards the picture. The lighting person can just kind of turn the light stay in the same place. It can even be in a stand. And all they're doing is just rotating the light or panning it from left to right to follow the actor as they go. If it's like turning a corner or something like that, that's easily done. So that way the light person doesn't have to follow them directly, because depending on the space, depending on how tight it is, they might be getting in the way, or they might not be able to hold the boom pole out or the light out far enough to be able to make those tight turns. So they might just have a light hidden away and then just turn it as the actor's walking through. Raphael said, are we going to be doing anything like that for the interrogation? I don't think so. I think I want just that one light, the idea that we have. We'll be adjusting that to see. We're going to adjust more so with ours. We're going to be adjusting how much fill light we add from the motivation of the table reflecting light. But I don't think we're going to have anyone holding it off to the side, because that'll be from a different angle than where the light is coming from in the scene. Let's see. This thing, Hollywooding a light, it's also called follow fill. So depending on who you're talking to, or I don't know which one's the more professional term. I'm assuming it's probably follow fill, but either way, it's the same concept. They're following the actor with the light. Could be from behind, in front, or the side, depending on where the actor's going and where the light is in their space. Obviously, they have to follow either behind or in front in this, because it's such a tight space. If they're to the side, they'll be really close to the actor. It could work, but they have to have a really tight shot if you're going to do that, having them to the side. So if you're having them in front and behind, it might work a little better in this tight hallway. Another thing about like these kinds of things is sometimes you might not have the person holding a light. Maybe they're holding a bounce or a bounce board or something behind the camera person. That way, any light that's coming off of the actor is getting reflected back into their subject. So if you ever have an actor that's using a prop or a practical light, like a lantern, a torch, flashlight, a cell phone flashlight, those kinds of things. You can have a person behind the camera holding a bounce, and that way the actor is kind of lighting themselves. They're facing it towards, off screen. So it's not into the camera's iris, but it's off to the side, but it's on that bounce card. So it's coming back to the actor and lighting them up the whole scene. And that can work really well. Even if they're looking around, it still looks a lot more realistic than having like a studio light on them the whole time. So if they're like, turning the flashlight from side to side and the light's kind of coming and going off their face, it could just look like they're reflecting it off their walls in their house or something like that. And it's a lot more believable than just having them super well lit the entire time, depending on what you're going for.
So everything you said was correct, but one of the reasons why they would do this is, like you can see in the picture, that sometimes it's always not feasible or pragmatic to set up lights. Like I'm pretty sure a cinematographer would have if he had it his way, he probably would have stringed or rigged up a set of lights in that hallway to light every point where the actor was going to walk. But some things is just not feasible to do. So this is like the alternative way of doing it. This is also, it can be a lazy way of doing it, where it's like, I just don't want to put a C-stand over there, so I can get a PA to go over there and just stand over there and just hold the light, which, it works both ways, but either way, it works. It can make or break you, because sometimes, an actor will move, and then let's say whoever you got holding the light doesn't move in time, it can cast an unwanted shadow. Depending on what kind of light he's holding, the light could actually show the person holding it, like the movement could actually show, and like you can like physically see shadows moving around on the character's face and stuff. So I mean, it works. I haven't had any issues doing it, but it could either make or break you.
Gotcha.
And as far as like you were talking earlier about the exposure for one, like let's say a character walks outside. And I've noticed like this is now like a style with Hollywood. They like let things go a lot more than they used to. Like before, I'm gonna say like 90s movies, like they had like everything was like perfect. Like if a character walked outside the door, like they spent time to make sure that the exposures would like hit the mark. But
Yeah.
now it's like I'll see movies now and I'm like, you know, a character will open the door and the door will be super overexposed. And I'll be like, man, they let that slide. Like they didn't try to, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah, they didn't try
now,
to equal it out.
yeah, nowadays they're just letting everything go nowadays and just running with it and stuff and not even trying, which it's cool by me because this is a lot of work. So there's another element. So you had mentioned, so you know how there's the camera operator, then there's the focus puller, and then there's the exposure guy, who's like the third guy, who's all his job is simply, I mean, you could double it up. A lot of times the focus puller would be worried about that too, but on a bigger scale production, there's a third guy, and his job is to worry about the exposure.
Mhm.
So like whenever you have things like that going on, like I had a situation in my film, one of my films, where one of the characters, she opens the door, she's coming out the bathroom, and she's in a towel, she's getting out the shower, and she's coming out the bathroom. She opens the door into a dark hallway. When the bathroom, her light is on, so she's, you know, I have a shot of the bathroom door in the hallway and it's dark. So when she opens the door, it's bright as fuck. So
Right.
that was cool. I exposed for the brightness. I exposed for that. So it was dark, and then she opens the door and she's normally exposed. But when she cuts the light off, because that was part of it, she cuts the light off and walks into the hallway. So when she cuts the light off, it gets super dark. So that was like something I really had to work on, because it was like as soon as she hit that light switch, I had to bump my f-stop all the way back up. And then that changed my focus and everything. And it was kind of hard to see her because it was so dark. So I had to mark on the lens where the focus would shift, and then well, I knew where the f-stop had to be, but like as soon as she hit that light, it was exposure and then focus and then move. So these things can get really tricky and really complicated, especially if it's just you focusing on it. And then on top of that, I had a prime lens, and I don't have the like nowadays everybody has the wireless, it's like a mechanical device that's used to do the focusing for you. I don't
Oh
have
yeah,
any of
I've
that.
seen the follow focus, and it's like a
Yeah, like
wireless system.
yeah, I don't have any of that. So that was all just fingers and just it was terrible. But I made it work. I mean, that was something very tricky, but it was simple. So like, thank God it was just that one shot. But just imagine like some movies are just like, you know, now she's inside, now she's back outside, now she walks back inside, or especially the
Right.
movies that do the one take.
Oh yeah.
Or
Jeez.
oh yeah, like that's another one where they have like a guy specifically designated for the multiple exposures, because just following one character in and out of a room, like you have to worry about that. That's something you have to worry about constantly.
Yeah, it's shifting exposure levels. The lighting changes, it changes everything about the scene. Like this hallway, even you can see at the end, it's very bright. I don't know if that's
Yeah.
their studio light or if that's the actual outside or wherever that is. But if she was going to go over there and they're exposed for her right here, the exposure would be all out of whack. So you'd have to do something like Brian's talking about and turning down or turning up your exposure levels on the camera so that you don't over or underexpose your subject or the surrounding area. Another alternative I've heard to this whole like the follow fill with a bounce, if the actor has something in their hands that is a light that can reflect back into them. One person said that they sometimes they just have, you know, crew usually wears black, but sometimes they'll have a crew member wear white just so it reflects some light, but not too much, and just gives off like a little bit of that light back at them. So if they have like a flashlight or a torch or something like that, they're just going to get a little bit of reflection back into them. It's going to be a little softer. and but it won't be too much to the point where they want it to look where they don't want it to have too much light reflecting back into their subject. So they want it to just have a little bit coming off of somebody's t-shirt. And so that's just like a cheap, easier option you might be able to do. Again, like Brian was saying, it depends on, you know, if the actor's moving around and they're moving their flashlight all over the place, then it's going to really affect how that even looks, because obviously the t-shirt is on the person and they're, you know, in front of the actor or beside them or wherever they are in relation to the actor. They can't just run around the room to match where the actor's looking or where they're turning. So it is something you'd have to think about, but that was a suggestion they gave, is just if you don't have a bounce, or if you don't want too much light to be reflected back and they have something that can reflect light back into them that they're using in the scene, using somebody with a white t-shirt instead of black, it could work for what you're doing. You can also use a light on a dolly for a smoother, more controllable light, similar to Hollywooding a light. You know, there's a lot of big productions and stuff like that, or lower budget, higher budget independent films that use dollies for their lights, and they have somebody, you know, controlling that, while somebody might be controlling the brightness, while somebody's doing the other things and making sure that the light's not hitting anybody and casting any shadows. So they blocked out the scene very well in advance, but it gives a little bit more control so that they know how smooth or how quickly that light's going to move in relation to the subject, and doesn't have as much shaking around, because no matter what, if you have a person holding something, it's going to be shaking around even a little bit. And depending on how hard that light source is or how soft you have it, it'll make a subtle difference in where the shadows are cast, depending on how much that person's moving around, how long they've been doing it, how they're holding it. If they're holding it for 5 hours, like this guy in the blue in this picture, obviously they're not going to be able to hold it as steady as they were 5 hours before that. So those are all some things to keep in mind if you're trying to have people hold lights, is that, you know, there will be subtle movement. It shouldn't do too much. If you're trying to do a very harsh light, it will probably, you know, it might be a little noticeable, but it probably wouldn't affect that much. But usually when you're doing something like a follow fill anyway, you want it to be a little bit softer so that it spills over your actor and it isn't casting some weird light that's going all over the place. But yeah, I think that's it. I think that's all I had. Does anyone have any questions or comments?
I don't think so. I think I asked you all the questions when we were looking at stuff.
Cool. So yeah, so just to reiterate, like the special effects stuff is more about trying to control multiple lights at once and moving them around so that it feels a little bit more natural to the scene. When the fire, TV, things like that, you just want it to be, you want to move them around or change the color temperatures or turn them off and on or give them dimmer and then brighter, just to give off those effects to make it seem a little more realistic than coming from one light source. If you only have one light source, try to figure it out by getting creative and using things like covering the light at certain points and then uncovering it. And there's different ways you can do it to get a little more creative with it. But if you do have if you are able to and can afford to get like a dimmable light, an RGB light or something like that, you can really start to mess around with it and see that you can control a lot more than you can with manual lights. The other thing, and then with the follow fill and the Hollywooding light, if you're following a subject, you just have somebody either using a bounce or a light or even a white t-shirt to just reflect light back into the actor. The bounce in the white t-shirt only work if the actor themselves are using a light source like a flashlight or a camera or something that's going to cast some kind of light that will reflect back into them to light them as the subject. And if you want to use a light, just to light them as they go down a hallway or they go walking towards a spooky door or whatever you're doing in your scene, just having somebody to follow along can help. But like Brian was saying, It can get very tricky very quickly depending on what is happening in your scene and the transitions between light and dark, from room to room, or if they're turning on or off lights. It's going to really get a little more complicated with everything, and timing will be a lot more of a of a must. Everyone will have to time it correctly and be in sync. So if the subject was going to be in the dark, we're going to follow her with this light, and then she's going to turn on a light. So we're going to turn off that light or immediately get it off of her so that she's not overexposed. That's all going to have to be timed really quickly and in sync so that it all happens like right now. And then everything works. But because of that, that's going to be a little more tricky. And you always want to be sure to, if you feel like you're going to need a scene like this, or use some kind of effect like this, just give yourself more time than you normally would for another shot, because it will be a little harder to pull off. So that's everything. The last thing I wanted to say is everyone watching and everyone else that comes in to the meetings, we are not going to be having any meetings next week. We're going to be shooting our short film. And then the week after that is Thanksgiving week. So we are not going to have any studies that week as well. So for anyone that's not in the crew of our short film, we are coming back to doing the meetings November 29th. I think that's Monday, November 29th. Let me make sure. Yeah, Monday, November 29th, we're going to have our next meeting where we'll talk more about some film stuff. And then the last thing I wanted to mention is that we have our second screenshot lighting mimic exercise. We sent out the screenshots from Blade Runner 2049 in the email. And we also have the Foley practice exercise. Those are both going to be due December 9th. So we have, quite a few weeks until then. It's almost a month. So whatever you have available to you, just get creative with trying to mimic one of those screenshots we took. There were a lot of oranges and a lot of there's the blue and the pink from the shot that a lot of people mimic from it. There's also a lot of oranges from different different softness or hardness amounts of light coming onto his face and giving harsher shadows or softer shadows. But they did use a lot of orange in that film. So we took some of those screenshots for it. And then the Foley practice exercise is just, going into a space, trying to get as quiet as possible and as soundproof as possible, and creating some Foley noises, getting creative with that to figure out what you can use everyday household items. Maybe go to Dollar Tree or something and just pick up some stuff, mess around with it and see what something might sound like. And once you get into editing with it, if you have editing software that has anything with sound, you can really start to make some interesting noises or effects just by messing around with natural sounds that you hear every day. So that's everything, guys. And I'm going to end the recording right there.